Well, I'm sort of wondering, how many of you have ever prayed through the Great Litany before? A lot of you have not. You have discovered a new thing in the prayer book, huh? It's always been my tradition, where I was in charge enough to make the decisions, to use the Great Litany this way at the beginning of Lent. Sometimes I would do it at the beginning of Advent as well. And the reason is because it is one of the most thorough prayers you will find anywhere. Now, most people, when they see it, I remember as a child, it would be done every now and then in my church, and it seemed like it lasted about an hour and a half. And in the modern prayer book, even though it's in the these and thous, it leaves out one of the great lines that's in the Old English Great Litany, and protect me from things in the dark, things that go bump in the night. If you've ever heard that phrase, it comes from the Great Litany in the English prayer book. Protect me from things that go bump in the night. It is truly the beginning of Lent is a reminder of how much work we need to do in order to continue to purify and to direct our souls in the right way, as it says in one of those lines. And we might wonder, well, I've been through a lot of Lents, done a lot of Lenten programs, eaten a lot of soup and bread, all those things. But the question is, do you actually do anything that's spiritually edifying for you between now and Easter? Certainly have no prescription for you. And I've done a million different things, and I've kind of ignored it sometimes. But if Jesus needed 40 days to get ready for his ministry, then surely I need to spend a little extra time on me. Now, it's interesting that in Mark's telling, it just says Jesus is out in the wilderness with the wild beasts and the angels minister to him. He doesn't have the more fulsome story of Satan coming to him and saying, if you'll worship me, I'll give you the whole world, or I'll turn this rock into bread. And Jesus says, no, man does not live by bread alone, but by the word of God. If you will throw yourself off the wall, the eastern wall where the Temple Mount is, if you ever go or have been to Jerusalem or look at the pictures, it's a drop because the wall is right on the edge of the Kidron Valley. And so you go off the walls and you go down the valley. It's into what was a trash dump where they burned the refuse from Jerusalem. So many images, both of destruction, of temptation, and of redemption. It is a pattern of human life that all of us go through. Times of destruction, times of rebellion, times of taking our own will and doing it our own way. Times of gratifying our most base desires at the expense of others. The sins of our youth, the psalm says, forgive me the transgressions of my youth. Oh my gosh. College in the 70s, it was made for transgression. All of us, even those of us who have lived long enough to sometimes have a little wisdom, too tired to really sin big anymore, Some are you chuckling? Yeah. We would if we could, you know. But the thoughts, the neglects, there's so many permutations of selfishness and self-centeredness. And that's what I love about the Great Litany, is it just enumerates so many of them. Not just our personal peccadillos, but also the social sins, the injustices, the violence that we sometimes just turn a blind eye. And yet, we pay our taxes. Our government spends $1 trillion a year on military, not to demean in any way those who serve. But think about that we still live in a world in which, in order to feel safe, our society has to spend $1 trillion a year basically training and equipping people to destroy and kill. We pretty it up with saying, defend and keep the peace, right? But the truth is, humankind has become so lethal that we're capable of destroying all life on this planet. Humankind is capable of destroying all the life on this planet. And yet what we see in the mythological story of the flood, which certainly has some historic precedent, something happened, because flood stories are found in many indigenous peoples' legends and stories. And I often think it must have been sometime between one of the interglacial periods when the earth warmed back up and the glaciers melted and lands that had been available became flooded and water was everywhere. And it was fearful because the planet was changing in such a way to take away what they knew and to endanger the way of life they had learned. And somewhere deep in our historic memory is the idea that it could all be taken away. An existential fear that everything could be taken away. And yet the story, as was brought down through the Hebrews, there's other stories, believe me, around this flood, ends up with God putting a bow, and we think of the rainbow, but the word also means a bow, an arrow bow, a weapon of war will be put in the sky so that God will remember. You think, does God have that bad of a memory? As he needs the rainbow to remind, oh yeah, I can't drown them all anymore. I want to, but I promise not to. And yet we've evolved to the place where we don't need God to do that anymore. We could do it to ourselves. Given that kind of power, even though none of us have the code or the suitcase, or control what happens in other nations, knowing that that existential possibility exists, what shall we do? Well, mostly we just have amnesia, don't we? Don't think about it. Then we're upset when the preacher brings it up. But Lent is the time to drop the illusions under which we operate and to face the stark truth of ourselves, of our lives, of our failures, of the injustices that we accept, and to, with no illusion, inspect our own conscience, which is the one place where we have at least a modicum of power to make change. I can't clean up the world, but I can vacuum my house. You know, it's that kind of thing. What do I actually have power or control or opportunity to adjust or change or to let go of? What new thing can I adopt that would help me be the person I wanted to be always? Because I do believe that in each of you and in me is that kernel of God-given identity, the image of God imprinted in us that gives us a conscience, that tries to direct us in the ways that are right and good and self-giving. It's so annoying, that conscience. You see, it's almost like Satan in the wilderness. Tell me I can't do something, and that's all I can think about. Tell me this is forbidden for you, and I'll be thinking, how could I do that without being discovered? Oh, we're so perverse. And it's a spiritual struggle that all humankind has to deal with in one way or another. Every religion of any kind asks its followers, its adherents, to let go of the illusions and to see the truth of the world and ourselves, and to anticipate what the invisible world might be. So as we begin Lent, if you don't have a plan yet for a spiritual exercise, besides maybe soup and bread, 148 in your prayer book, the Great Litany. Take a couple or one, just one of those petitions, one of those beseeches, one of those spare us, one of those hear us, and just meditate on them one at a time. If you were to do that, many of the illusions and the amnesias that we use to protect ourselves will be exposed. But I love how it ends. O Christ, hear us. We beseech thee, O God, to spare us. Where is mercy to be found? Truly not in my conscience. My conscience is a tough judge, built in by Grandma. I beseech thee, have mercy upon me. And may God have mercy upon you.